listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. It is nearly the end of the financial year, and that means tax time. This year, the ATO has been really upfront about what its red flags will be and how, in particular, it's cracking down on anyone claiming work from home expenses.
The ATO has incredible data matching and machine learning going on in the background of what they do. So they benchmark everybody in the same age, the same location, the same occupation. Everyone's kind of benchmarked against each other.
You're not going to want to miss this episode of The Briefing if you want to maximise the dollars you get back in your bank account, or even just avoid getting in trouble for accidentally claiming the wrong thing. Everything you need to know before you lodge your return, that is coming up. But first, Helen Smith is here with the headlines. It is Monday, the 24th of June.
Morning, Sash. The federal government will force the big supermarkets to adhere to a code of conduct with hefty fines for breaches. In a move that has been anticipated for months, Labor will today confirm it is adopting all recommendations set out in a review by former Minister Craig Emerson. The legislation will include massive fines that could be as much as 10% of turnover. Given the annual sales revenues of Coles and Woolworths is over $40 billion, that could see penalties worth billions.
Yeah, the code will apply to all supermarkets operating in Australia with an annual profit of $5 billion or more. Right now, that'd include Coles, Woolies, Aldi and Metcash, which runs IGA, but that could also expand to include Costco and Amazon, if Amazon ever does grocery deliveries in Australia like it does in the US. And look, one of the big focuses of the review has been on how the grocery giants deal with suppliers who have reported they fear retribution if they speak up about unfair deals. And it's worth noting, Helen, this code of conduct that's kind of already existence was drawn up by the supermarkets themselves 10 years ago, but they don't have to follow it. It's not enforced in any way. So that is what this review has recommended, that they make it mandatory and that they make all the supermarkets follow it. In terms of how long, like what a timeline might look like, so making the code of conduct mandatory won't be difficult. The harder part is going to be the penalties for breaches, which, as you said, would be in the billions of dollars or could be in the billions of dollars. They will require legislation that will have to change the Competition and Consumer Act. Now, whether this will have support, the coalition has previously indicated it might support a mandatory code. But Peter Dutton also called the review by Craig Emerson a Mickey Mouse review that has been conducted by Labor, and also questioned whether it will result in a reduction in prices, which is what we the people want. We want cheaper groceries. We don't want to be ripped off when we're doing our weekly shop. And look, separate work is happening on prices. The government has also commissioned quarterly monitoring of how much we're paying at the grocery stores. And that first report dropped last week, finding Aldi had cheaper groceries by about 25%. Lots of stuff happening in groceries.
There are, and this is why I love Aldi. Days after the coalition revealed its plan for nuclear power in Australia, a new poll is out showing voters are pretty split on whether it's a good one. The Resolve Political Monitor conducted for 9 newspapers surveyed just over 1,000 people, finding 41% back it and 37% are against the move. 22% of respondents said they hadn't made up their mind yet, indicating both sides could gain ground in polling on the issue. And over the weekend, the Smart Energy Council released figures claiming Peter Dutton's plan to build 7 nuclear reactors across 5 states would cost at least $116 billion and possibly as much as $600 billion. Now, Dutton says it will be cheaper than Labor's renewable plan, though.
And the Libs and Nats are still refusing to reveal how much it'll cost. And that is going to be the bugbear of the government as it tries to convince people not to back Peter Dutton's nuclear plan. Dutton himself said he's happy for the election to be a referendum on nuclear. So this is going to be the big issue over the next 12 months as we slowly march towards another vote. Look, also over the weekend, we heard from former PM Paul Keating, who was extremely scathing, unsurprisingly, of Peter Dutton's plan. He labelled him a charlatan and a climate change denialist. Now, I found that interesting because there's a report out that surveyed a bunch of countries right around the world in how they feel about climate change, which seems insane that we're still doing that these days. It found that Australia is one of the most sceptical nations in the world when it comes to climate change. 60% believe it's human caused and that the cost of addressing it through renewables is worth it, full stop. And that is down 6%. The global average is 73%. So we are really far behind in terms of what the rest of the world's attitude is towards climate change and how to address it. So I found that an interesting one off the back of Paul Keating's comments. A major shopping centre in Adelaide went into lockdown for over 2 hours yesterday afternoon after a brawl broke out between two groups of teenagers. South Australia Police Assistant Commissioner Scott Duval said Marion Shopping Centre's management issued an evacuation alarm after reports some of the group had weapons, including expandable batons.
The expandable batons are seen, and at this stage we can't discount any other weapons, but we do have some reports that a knife may be involved.
Duval also said it appears the teens were known to each other and it was not a random attack, but further investigations are underway. The boys fled the scene and haven't been found yet. In terms of injuries, a woman in her 70s did cop a fracture during the evacuation process. Another person was treated for a non-life-threatening injury. And the shopping centre is going to reopen as normal today. Helen, I can imagine a big part of the fear of this, Bondi, the stabbing at the Sydney Westfield, was only in April, and, you know, similar scenes where there's evacuation alarms going and people are running in fear, it'd be really scary.
Yeah, it would have been really scary, and I saw some videos online that people posted that were there, and I grew up in Adelaide. This shopping centre is probably one of the biggest ones we have, and it's quite similar to Bondi Junction on those grounds, but yeah, there was some reports shoppers that were in the cinemas were quite scared after other shoppers were coming in and yelling and telling them to evacuate. And I mean, if you're in the middle of a movie and that happens, it's quite scary. And the shoppers did say to the media that they were hiding behind seats. Some people ran to emergency exits as the alarms were going off. So, yeah, it is quite a scary experience. But, yeah, as you said, thankfully no one was really injured. So that is good. And the 64th TV Week Logie nominations have been announced with some exciting new talent making the mix. So the nominees for the biggest prize of the night, the Gold Logie Award for the most popular personality on Australian television, the list includes Andy Lee, Asha Keddy, Julia Morris, Larry Emder, Sonia Kruger, Tony Armstrong, and newcomer Robert Irwin.
Ooh.
So the award ceremony will be broadcasted on Sunday, August the 18th, and you can cast your vote online leading up to that. Now, I am really excited as well for one of my favourite noms is Boy Swallows Universe, which has been nominated for a few acting awards with their leads and also for Best Miniseries. What are you looking forward to?
Oh, Best Competition Reality Program, because I'm a huge Survivor fan and Australian Survivor, the most recent season, Titans vs Rebels, has been nominated. I saw as well Alone Australia, which I know you really like.
I love Alone.
I've got to get into Alone. I haven't watched it yet. I liked with the Gold Logie, so Hamish and Andy, obviously they're listener podcasters. Their podcast is absolutely huge, constantly at number one on the
charts.
Always beating us. How dare they? But Hamish is constantly nominated. But Andy's finally got a nod, which is so exciting for him.
Yeah, I was excited to see that. And I was also excited to see Tony Armstrong and Robert Irwin. Now, I had some mixed thoughts about Robert because I was like, he's pretty new on the scene, but you can't not love him at the same time. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure who I want to win the gold nom.
It'd be nice to see Larry take it out. Larry's been around for a very long time, so I'm going to get behind Larry Emder. Why not? Hey, Helen, thanks so much for being here for the headlines. Next up, it's our deep dive looking at tax time, what you need to know before you lodge your return.
Hey, Katrina here with you. For a lot of us, tax seems to be a secret language that only the super savvy or the very rich can understand, especially when you see the figures like in the latest data released by the Tax Office that in the 21-22 financial year, more than 100 Australians earned more than $1 million in total income, yet paid No tax, nothing. That doesn't seem fair at all. What do they know that we don't? And what are the red flags the ATO is going to be cracking down on this year? You might want to open up the notes section on your phone while you listen to this briefing, because hopefully there'll be a few hacks you can put to use while you're doing your tax return this year that could actually save you some money. Ashley Debenham is from Etax Accountants and joins us now. Ashley, let's start with what the ATO has told us they're going to be cracking down on this year. We know that claiming for work from home expenses can be really beneficial. A lot of us are doing that. But where do we need to be careful?
Yeah, so the main thing with work from home that the ATO changed about 12 months ago was they tightened the rules for record keeping. So while they said, yeah, it's all good, we're upping the rate to 67 cents per hour, what kind of got lost in the noise there was that now, instead of being able to have a 4-week diary that kind of showed a pattern of use, which is how you used to do it, you now have to have a record of every hour that you work from home during the year if you want to claim that 67 cents. So people are getting caught out because they come to tax time and they realise, well, I don't have a record of what I was doing working from home 11 months ago, and it makes it much more difficult to claim work from home correctly.
Yeah, that seems so onerous and almost impossible to claim for that stuff.
Yeah, look, you can read between the lines of why the ATO did it. I guess through the COVID boom, they went from maybe 1 million people were kind of claiming some sort of work from home. And I think last year it was about 4 million people. So it's obviously putting a bit of a strain on the revenue at the ATO's end. So they've made the record keeping a bit tighter, I think, just to, I guess, put a little bit more money in their coffers, I suppose. But one tip I do have is if you get to kind of this point of the year and you realise you don't have kind of a record of every hour of every day you work from home, you could probably have a chat with your employer. A lot of employers will have timesheeting or payroll software that distinguish between when you work from home, when you didn't work from home, and they might be able to actually run a report for you.
Now, asking for a friend, I also read that if you cut and paste your expenses from last year, that could be a red flag for the ATO as well.
Yes, definitely. The ATO has incredible data matching and machine learning going on in the background of what they do. So they benchmark everybody in the same age, the same location, the same occupation. Everyone's kind of benchmarked against each other, and copying and pasting from last year is another way that you're going to kind of set off an alarm bell at the ATO, and they might want to pay a little bit closer attention, particularly with something like work from home. I definitely think you should steer clear of doing a copy and paste job.
Good advice. Ashley, I read some really interesting research done by Finder that said that there was a real generational difference between boomers and millennials in terms of, how much risk, I suppose, they're prepared to take on when they're filing their tax return. Apparently, boomers don't ever lie on their tax returns, or rarely. But millennials, 1 in 10, feel comfortable telling a porky to the ATO. Have you come across this, and why do you think this is?
I would say that the younger generation are perhaps a little bit less risk averse to the boomers. And we do see at Etax, we will see kind of people potentially, I guess, pushing the envelope. But look, honestly, I wouldn't be, if I was a young person looking to push the envelope, you would also need to make sure you could back up whatever you're claiming. The ATO is getting smarter and smarter each year with how they can identify people who are making incorrect claims. And if the ATO did flag you and you couldn't back up what you were claiming, then not only would you have to pay back whatever extra refund they gave you, but if they think you've done it maliciously, then they can also impose fines as well.
Yeah, speaking of the rules, I feel like with tax, there are all of these kind of secret rules that perhaps the everyday person doesn't know about. And that's borne out for me when I see the data that I was referring to earlier about all these millionaires who are paying no tax. Like, what did they know that we don't know?
I think probably they have far more complicated, I guess, financial affairs than the everyday person, which means the more complicated your affairs are, the more that these kind of rich people can undertake. I would call it legal tax avoidance. And there's a big industry for some top end of town accounting firms who kind of help people do that. And it usually comes down to whether they have multiple sources of income, that they also have businesses as well as personal income. And it allows them to kind of shift money around where to balance out profit and loss, I suppose. It's the same way that kind of these large corporations that we kind of hear the big 100 companies in Australia, about half of them pay no tax either. And it's the same way where wherever they're making all the money, they then shift the money around and use deductions to offset all of that money. And it basically reduces their tax bills down to very small amounts or to zero. And whether it's donations to charity, whether it's kind of money in a company where they're writing off company expenses against the income that's coming in. There's all sorts of dark arts, I suppose, to tax avoidance that's available to people with complicated affairs that the everyday man like you and I don't have access to, unfortunately.
All right, so what's something easy that most people don't claim for or don't know that they can claim for?
I would say one thing we see all the time at Etax is people forget to sweat the small stuff. And what I mean by that is you make a work-related purchase, I don't know, in August, it's $30 and you don't think anything of it, you move on. That really adds up over the year. If you do that every couple of weeks, you do that across the course of a year, that's maybe $500 or $1,000 worth of deductions that you're missing out on come tax time. So we always say snap a photo of the receipt as soon as you get it, even if it's only $30, stick it in a folder on your phone, and then at tax time, you might have another few $100 sitting there ready to go. Other really common ones that I kind of see people forgetting are if you use a tax agent, any fee you pay them is tax deductible the following year. People often forget that if they, in July this year, pay $100, $200 to have their tax return done, that's a deduction for next year. So don't forget about it and pop it on your return next year. Other things like union fees, membership fees, a lot of kind of professionals now are part of industry bodies. A lot of kind of tradies or teachers or nurses are all part of a union or a membership. A lot of them have to pay membership fees to be a teacher or a nurse or a doctor. Every single one of those fees you pay, it's work-related.
I work outside as a reporter, so can I claim for stuff like sunscreen and sunglasses?
Yep, that's another common one. People misunderstand how, I guess they're called sun protection expenses is the broad term for them. And if you work outside, it's not just reserved for, say, a tradie who's working outside on a building site. If you're, like you said, you're out hitting the beat, you're doing some reporting. If you need sunglasses to kind of protect your eyes, if you need sun cream, that's all deductible. If you buy a hat to protect your head, then that's also deductible. And the same goes for people who are on the road driving all the time. Like if you have to drive as part of your job from workplace to workplace, or if you're a salesman who's on the road, again, if you need to buy sunglasses to protect your eyes, those things are work-related expenses as well. The only caveat there is if they are work and personal, the ATO will expect you to apportion any personal usage out of it. So if you can keep anything work-related separate, then you can just claim it at 100%. But if you do wear the sunglasses on the weekend or whatever, then the ATO would expect you to do some sort of maths to split work and personal use up.
Does the ATO kind of go, oh, you're really just taking it too far by claiming these $300 Gucci glasses, or does it have to be a $20 pair from the servo?
It's a bit of a fine line and it's a grey area, that one. It's kind of, we've seen that with a common one that's kind of related to that are handbags and briefcases, because again, people never used to realise that you could claim a suitcase or a handbag, especially now with people doing the hybrid work from home, work from the office. They have to cart their laptop backwards and forwards. But if you're going out and buying a Louis Vuitton bag for $1,000, it might raise some flags with the ATO as to why you needed that $1,000 bag as opposed to a $100 bag. And the same would go with sunglasses. But there is a bit of leniency there from the ATO. The main thing is that you can show that it was definitely required for your work and that you have evidence to support, like a receipt or whatnot, to support the claim you're making. You need to make sure all your ducks are in a row.
So finally, what are the top tips you can leave us with that we should all be thinking about this tax time?
I would say don't get sucked into end of financial year sales. They're everywhere at the moment, with retailers saying now make your tax time purchases, blah, blah, blah. Keep in mind that any purchase you make that's over $300, depreciation rules will apply. So if you go and buy that $3,000 computer or the $1,000 drill today, you will only get 9 days worth of depreciation on your tax return next year. So I was running the numbers yesterday, and someone who buys a $2,500 computer today will get a $30 of that back in their tax return as part of their tax refund this year, because the ATO makes you claim the computer over the whole life of the computer, which is for the next 2 years. So you'll get a big claim in your next tax return, but if you're falling for a retailer who's saying buy it now and claim your tax deduction, you might be in for a bit of a rude shock when the time comes to do your tax return.
That is an epic tip, by the way.
And tax cuts are coming in on the 1st of July. So that means most of us our tax rates are going to go down. So if you do have any kind of purchases you need to make that are work-related now, make them before the 30th of June, because you'll get a bigger deduction claiming it this year than you will next year. So somebody who's on a 37% tax bracket will get this effectively 37% of the purchase back this year. But if they made that purchase in July, that tax deduction will drop to 30% because their tax bracket's going to drop to 30%.
Oh, Ashley, you've given us so much to think about. Thank you so much for your time and joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
That was Ashley Debenham from Etax Accountants. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is all from us for now. Before you go, though, we would love it if you could share this episode with someone you think might enjoy it, or maybe, someone who's struggling with their tax return this year. And a reminder, we put our full episodes of our weekend briefing chats on YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom to see them.
Listener.